morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're talking about feedback questions.
So I think I've been running games for a long time. I mean, I've been probably since 1980. And in about 1985, I really started running games at conventions. And about 20 years later, about 2015, I guess, I'm thinking of, as I'm making up my own adventures for games, I'm thinking, well, maybe I want to publish something like that. And self-publishing exploded, right, during that time, where you could actually just publish your own stuff. And drive-through-RPG is a great way of publishing your own stuff. So as I'm starting to think about publishing stuff, I'm thinking about, how are my games? Are they worth writing down and trying not, maybe, I don't know about selling them, but at least making them publicly available for public consumption. And one of the things you do when you run a game like that you want to publish, you probably want to have feedback on your game. Now, I'm mainly talking about adventures, though some people are actually making RPG games. And I think there's a difference between writing an adventure for publication of a game that exists compared to making your own RPG game. So with that in mind, you want different kinds of feedback for each of those different types of content you're creating. And so this question comes up on Reddit and quite a bit of like, what questions should I ask in feedback? What do I need to know? When you run an adventure, I would normally, after an adventure, I would say, try to get feedback, right? I would say, how was the game? And that was a terrible way to try to get feedback, because people would go, oh, yeah, it's a good game. You did great. Like, absolutely, that would not very helpful. So obviously, that's not the best way to get feedback, right? You have to write it down, the questions. You got to write down the questions. And I would definitely tell the people who are playing, I want feedback from this adventure. You still have to figure out what questions to ask. And there was a lot of good ideas that I got from Reddit, because people answered this question about previous people who had asked it on Reddit. And a lot of people were saying, well, you want to ask questions that help you make your whatever you're creating better. And don't ask, well, did you have fun? Because that's really
Subjective.
Or everything is subjective, right, in this case. But that is really subjective, right? So what you ask is questions that pertain to the adventure that you're running or that you're creating. For example, there was quite a few questions I thought were pretty brilliant. One of them was there anything in the game that you didn't like? And was there anything in the game in the adventure that was, I'm talking about adventure, that you really did like? Is there a part of the adventure that you would take out completely, and is there something that you would definitely leave in? Now, those type of questions help you as a author of or creator of an adventure, what people liked and people didn't. But the thing is, some people may not just like something for whatever reason. So you have to ask you have to get lots of feedback on that one subject or on that one thing that you're creating. And I think those kind of questions are the best. So
I think I was reading about it, and somebody said, if somebody tells you they don't like something, you should take into consideration the circumstances. Was it that they just didn't like that subject? They just didn't like the way you did it. They just didn't, or was it that you got to look at their answer a little bit more than just, they didn't like that, so I'm just going to cut that out.
No, you're right. You're right. Everything has to be weighed and measured, right?
Yeah. So what are the questions that you think are good? I mean, besides those two. Okay,
so for me, let's say I'm writing an adventure, I want to get feedback for it. Overall, did the adventure work? I think that gives you a general idea of how the adventure was taken, right? And that's a really broad question, right? Did it work? And within that question, there are like other things you can break it down. Was the adventure believable? Did the characters act in a believable fashion? Did the flow of events seem realistic? Now, when I was running my adventure of the Western that I wrote, people were saying, well, there was like elements missing if this was the bad guy's plan. I'm like, oh, I had not thought of that, right? I just thought about their plan and what they needed to implement that plan, and my plan was very short-sighted. The list of things they needed to implement their dastardly deed was missing a few items. So when I described the scene of where they were hoarding the stuff to implement the plan, they're like, oh, this is kind of weird. So all there is this? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, they don't have this or that? I'm like, I should have said yes, right? When they're asking those kind of questions, and they're like, well, that's kind of odd, right? I'm like, shite. So those kind of things that I had not foreseen, that I had not thought of would, even though I didn't ask for feedback, but that was like a big deal.
You got it.
I got it.
You got it or not.
And that's happened in other games too, where I'm running the game, whether I made it or not, or whether I created it or not. I present a situation where the players go, well, why did they do that? That doesn't make sense. They may not say it, but they're like questioning, like, why? What is up? And so sometimes it works to my advantage, because the players are so creative that they come up with some crazy cockamamie idea, and I'm like, whoa, thank God, I'll use that one, because I didn't think of why they would be doing this or why this happened in this order. That's a good question to ask, and then of course there's the follow up questions of, was it believable? Was this game fun? And did it make sense? Did things make sense? So why the motivations of the NPCs make sense? And so when they get that kind of information, and sometimes you can get it just from just running the game and you can see it. And sometimes people, you look back on it and you go, and people remind you that, well, this didn't make sense, even though we just went along with it. To me, the player, it didn't make sense why this person would act this way. And that's good feedback, right? That's because then you think, oh, I see, and then you can see what they're talking about. You can see the fallacy or there's a disconnect between this character and that character, where in your brain they're like, oh yeah, they're like friends because of this. I'm like, oh,
but you didn't tell anybody that.
Yes.
So things like that will help you to see that you didn't tell people that so and so was friends with so and so because of this, right?
And stuff like that. Of the things that you liked, what stands out, right? What definitely has to stay in because people liked it, and that's all. Again, this is all
I think that this is what there's two different things, right? If you're doing a play test versus a new game test, because if it's an adventure that you're testing, these questions are critical. But if it's a RPG, I think you're going to want to have extra other questions, right?
Oh, definitely. That's why I did separate them. Yeah, things that you like stand out. Another thing is what did not work, right? What threw you out of the game? What broke your immersion? If such an event happened, that's more critical than what was good, because you may not see your own mistake, or you may not see that there's a problem in that part of the adventure. So if more than one or two players say, yeah, this plot, this NPC, whatever, I didn't like, it didn't make sense, then you can retool your adventure.
Well, when you ask this question about what threw you off, or what was there something that you didn't like, you might want to put specifics in there, like I don't know.
Yeah. In fact, I did what didn't work. A, character. B, your character. You didn't like your character. There was a disconnect with your characters in one sense or another. NPCs, the plot hooks, and then the resolutions. So those are things that you would ask, like sub-questions or follow-up questions.
I think you should know that when you do like a playtest or even just a regular game with not only friends, but any people that play RPGs or tabletop RPGs, they're going to tell you what they think. And so you should not take it personally. Like, okay. Yeah. You shouldn't, like, if you say, how was this game? Then they'll go, oh yeah, that's great. But if you give them a questionnaire, he wants to know what I really think, right?
Oh yeah.
And they're going to write it for you, and they're going to tell you. So you're trying to get feedback.
Maybe, I don't know. I've never actually given them a form. That's another problem I've always had. Even though I've wanted feedback on my games, usually I would forget to make a form, right? And it just, not struggling, but I'm usually rushing to make sure that I got everything in, and the feedback questions always never materialize, right?
Well, maybe you should make those first before you do the rest.
That's
of the
true,
stuff.
and I should just and again, you should tell your players, oh, you know what, I would like to have a feedback questionnaire given to you after the game. But actually, somebody on the Facebook on the Reddit said that you should give those questions beforehand, so when they're playing the game, they have it at the back of their mind. If you're really just play testing, now when you go to a convention and you're running the game, maybe people don't want that idea that they have to work. So I would definitely put in the description, I want feedback for this game. Full disclosure kind of thing. So people know that that's what you want to do. Whether they fill one out or not, it's not going to matter. I mean, they can or not. It all depends on the people that show up. Some people may see that there's a play test, but they don't care. They're going to come because they like the description of the game. And then afterwards, they're like, well, I need to get to another game, or I need to go to sleep. And they won't do the questionnaire.
Well, you can't force them.
Yeah, exactly. Keep the questionnaire as short as possible. That's another hint that somebody put down. Another question I had is, did the adventure flow well? Now, this could be mostly the GM's ability to run a game, right? I'm not saying I'm a great GM, but I really, even to this day, when people start talking about flow and another one, pacing and all this other stuff, I have no clue as to what you're talking about. I just run the game the way I've always run the game. And whether my pacing is just inherent or I don't have pacing, it's really strange for me to hear about that, because they always talk about pacing in an adventure when you're GM.
Well, after you GM for a while, well, I guess not everybody, but I think that you kind of learn that if the players are beating their head against the wall, move along.
Yes.
I mean, don't give them whatever they need and keep going, because you don't want them stuck in a room trying to figure something out for 20 minutes.
You know? You're right. I think that maybe I've developed a natural way of pacing or something, but mainly because I'm a player, as I'm GMing, of course, and if I'm bored, then the players are probably bored too. So we move along the game. I move along the game in that sense. I haven't seen that too many times, except when players are distracted right now, especially with phones, because the phone is so easy to see that they're distracted, right? When they pull out a phone, like, okay, that's when I shift my attention to them and like put that phone back in your pocket. And but I'm not going to do that in the middle of a scene with three other characters. And now that's happened to me too, where I'm running the game, and then the person that's not in when they split the party, the person who's not playing at the moment, they whip out their phone, and I'm like, okay, I got to get back to that person because I don't want that phone out on the table too long. That has to do with the subject. Of course, when you are a game designer, now that's a totally different animal, what do you want to call it, because you are asking different questions. You're asking questions that have to do with mechanics, right? Now, one person said, don't ask questions about game balance and stuff like that, because the player's not going to have any idea about that stuff, right? They don't know if you change this is going to mess up this other stuff that you have in your rule set. Basically deal with questions about
Specific things.
Rules. Are they clear? And how complex are they? The rules that I write, did you understand them?
Right.
If you want a complex game, that's one thing. If you don't, that's another thing. But you still got to ask, how complex do you think this game was? Right? Characters. Did you like your characters? Was
there a character that you wanted to play that wasn't provided, or a character type?
Right. Or was the character fun to play? Another part of the rules is combat, right? How did you like the combat? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Was it too fiddly, or whatever kind of questions you want? How you want to...
Combat is a big thing, so you're going to want to ask lots of questions.
Yes, and
if you're playtesting a new game, you're going to want to have lots of playtests with lots of different people answering those questions, so you can compare and contrast.
Definitely. If you are creating a game, you want to playtest your system as much as possible, because players are the only way you're going to find playtesters, the only way you're going to find problems with your mechanics, with that combat resolution system, whether even if it's a really complex space opera type of combat rules, that's fine, but players will find problems with the way it works. So, and this, whether it makes sense or not, and that's something that as a RPG creator you will have to deal with. Like when I run an adventure, oh, this is not my game, just the way the combat works. People go, oh, okay, it's not important.
Yeah.
But if you're asking about your adventure, you're like, well, how did the combat flow? Oh yeah, it was enough combat. Was combat necessary and stuff like that? I didn't think we should have gone and fight in this case, or I don't think it was necessary to fight this guy. And it seemed like they wanted to fight us for whatever reason. Stuff like that. That's different. But when you're creating an RPG, those questions are way different. The task resolution system. This is what your skill resolution system, and some people's they make the combat and the task resolution very similar or the same thing. Other times they're totally different how they work. That's fine. But did people understand the how you got things done? For them, the players, did it make sense?
That's interesting. I would always tell the person that I would want the task resolution to be the same for both combat and...
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. But sometimes a lot of RPGs make combat more
complex.
Simply because usually they do the whole time dilation, right? Everything squeezes into this. Each time gets lengthened or shortened? I don't know what it is.
It gets lengthened.
Lengthened, right? So you move slower, right?
Yeah.
You're not talking about in real time.
You're talking about 6-second intervals.
Intervals, 10 seconds, 2 minutes, or a minute. D&D used to be a minute, right? In the old D&D, a round was a minute. So there was a round of ching, 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 not just one swing, one hit type of deal. For fun, is this game fun? I think that is a good question for people developing an RPG, because if it's not fun, and a lot of people tell you it's not fun,
then it's probably not fun.
You have a problem, right? And as open-ended as that question is, I think what it does is it's tying everything together as far as all your things. Does your whole system that you have going on.
I think it's a different question for testing a game versus an adventure, right?
Yes, of course.
Because for the game, if everything was great, except you couldn't figure out why in the combat you had to roll 22 dice to get to the resolution, that might have, and it's bothering you, telling the person is a good thing.
Well, for example, Star Trek Adventures, right? They use a 2D20 system. I mean, Modiphius made the game. Modiphius came up with the system. And they have this idea of challenge dice. And challenge dice is a random way of figuring out how much damage you do when you hit. Mm-hmm. Right? And the challenge dice gives you a variable of 1, 2 hit points of damage, no hit points of damage twice, and then the 5 and 6 are points of damage with a
special effect.
I think a lot of people like that kind of variability in whether you did a lot of damage or no damage and stuff. Other people absolutely did not like it, right? Because if you're going to hit somebody and you're going to roll to hit and you're going to spend momentum and you're going to do these things, and then all of a sudden you roll the challenge dice and it comes up blanks, how can you hit somebody with no damage? Oh, it was a grazing, but you come up with all kinds of excuses. It just seems very unexciting. Right, and then if you roll a 5 or a 6 challenge dice, if you're using regular dice, a 5 or a 6 is a special effect. But you don't have a special effect. Your weapon doesn't do a special effect. You don't do a special effect when you hit with that weapon. So basically, for a 3, 4, 5, and 6 means no damage to you.
I think that's for Star Trek. That was the because for Star Trek, you're pointing a phaser at someone and shooting. So a phaser is in reality, quote unquote, is always going to do damage unless you totally boff it and miss the person, right?
Right.
Versus like Modiphius also did Conan, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
Conan is 2D20, and those challenge dice are fine, except a lot of people do not have parry with their sword, as a thing. So it doesn't necessarily, parry doesn't do anything with the challenge dice.
No.
But what, like vicious or
Yes,
different
those
things.
are knocked down.
Yeah.
Right.
So those change things. But Conan is a much more complex system anyway, because you have to roll. You have to roll to see where you hit the person, because you need to know where their armor is, right? If they have any.
Correct. Because they have various parts of armor in different places.
Right. So I don't know who play tested those games, but I think I don't know. I don't remember in Star Trek having any problem with the dice. The
challenge dice. It happened. But in the second edition, they eliminated Star Trek Adventures.
They eliminated it.
They eliminated the challenge dice. So now your weapon, whatever weapon you use, just does a static damage.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points of damage.
I think that for Star Trek, that's better than
right. And I guess, why would they change that, right? Obviously,
because people,
when they ask
told them.
feedback, they go, well, that doesn't make sense. I don't like this idea. It makes sense. Like you said, I think it makes more sense for Conan than it does for Star Trek. Because one, combat is not a big deal.
right.
And phasers probably the main weapon that you use, other than your fists or your karate chop, double axe handle to the back, or the double kick to the chest, a la William Shatner or Captain Kirk. Obviously when they came up with the second edition, they were like, I don't know how they did it because I don't remember being asked, but somehow they came up with the idea that let's eliminate challenge dice, because obviously some players didn't like it, and those people were vocal enough, or somebody was vocal enough to say, yeah, this doesn't work.
Well, because even no matter how many playtests you do before you release a game, once it's actually released and people start playing it, they're going to start talking amongst each other and on whatever board you want to call it.
Oh yeah, on Discord nowadays.
Discord.
They're
gonna tell each other what they liked and don't like, right? And the designers of the gamer they're gonna
right.
It might even be their Discord, right?
That's a prime example of rules being changed, because none of the other D20 systems have done that.
Yeah.
And they all tweak the rules a little bit. And Star Trek Adventures was like the third or fourth game that used this system.
Conan was before them.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
there was Conan. There was Mutant Chronicles.
So when you're looking at
Infinity.
When you're going from Conan to Star Trek, I can see that in Conan those dice do mean something,
right?
Because especially like if you're an archer or something, right? I'm just thinking of the people that I've played with in Conan, and people give you special powers with your bow that you have because it's Conan, right? This is a bow of some god or whatever.
Well, and it comes from the Conan is a fantasy role-playing game where people are used to rolling for damage, right? They're used to rolling to hit and then used to rolling for damage. And we as players who play fantasy role-playing games love the idea of trying to get that maximum damage, right?
And also taking with that the fact that you may not get the maximum damage, right?
Yes.
It may turn out differently than you envision it, but at the same time, that's part of the world, right?
And you're willing, and that
you're willing to do that.
The risk reward of that is usually more acceptable in fantasy role playing games.
Versus Star Trek, I can see that if I'm pointing a phaser at you and I phaser
supposedly hit you,
then
you should take damage.
Yeah.
What miraculous thing is thread is going to bounce off that? Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's what they did. They found out, and when you play Star Trek Adventures 2nd Edition, you'll find that it's been eliminated. And of course, there's also the idea of rolling too many times, right? Maybe people didn't want to, I got to pick up a freaking bunch of 6-sided dice and roll damage for that, and I got to figure that out. I'd rather just roll my 2d20s or 3d20s, whatever I get, because I either have momentum or giving the GM threat to roll those extra dice to hit. Then I should be rewarded for the hit and not have it dissipate away for
whatever
unknown reasons.
Yeah.
And the last, would you play again? I think this would be a big deciding factor as to how your game is accepted or taken, right? If people would be willing to play again, even if they had a lot of flaws, even if they said, well, I didn't like this part, I didn't like, but they would, oh, you know what, but I really had a good time. I would play it again if it should make these changes or whatever. And I think that's a big one, because for you as a RPG creator, if too many people are saying, yeah, I don't know, I would not play. And of course, you got to remember, some people may not be very truthful in this sense, because they might say they'll play again, but they're like, I don't want to hurt your feelings, right? Which brings me to one of the last things that I want to talk about is, well, not before that, is that when you're making a role-playing game, the questions usually have to be a little bit more specific, right? They have to, you're asking for specific things or problems with the game as presented, and not this general, oh, did you have fun? And did you like the way that the thing worked? Because what you want is stuff that you can act on, right? That you can change. Like I believe Star Trek Adventures with Modiphius, when they changed the rules, they must have had a play testers, or they must have asked players who had already been playing the game, what would you like to change? What don't you like about Star Trek Adventures? Now, I don't remember that questionnaire, but I wasn't when the play test.
You also don't always check your email, so
that's true. And I'm not active on their forums or Discord channel and stuff like that. I don't see how people have so much time on their hands for that stuff. But anyway, I was in their playtest version, and they did change things constantly on the playtest. The playtest rules, I still have them. I printed them out, and it's vastly different than the game that's even printed, the first edition. They changed the names of the attributes. They changed the way the skills work. They changed a lot of things from the playtest to even the alpha rules. Because I remember I was running the Star Trek Adventures before it even came out.
Yeah.
And somebody wanted an extra character, so I gave him a character from the playtest rules, and he goes, that doesn't say the same thing as this one, or it's not the same. Like even the
character sheet,
the attributes were different, or how it worked. I'm like, oh my God, they really changed the rules. And I had forgotten how much the rules had been changed, because I had been playing and changed, running the game as it had changed, and forgotten how weird not weird, but how much changes they had made to the character.
Right.
So even just to the character or the attributes. So when the player goes, this doesn't have aeronautics or whatever, I'm like, what? And I looked at the character, I looked side by side, I go, oh, they're totally different. And the approach and all this other stuff. Well, obviously, Modiphius listened to their playtesters, and then when they were coming out with second edition, they obviously listened to people who had been playing the game and said, what are your pet peeves about this game? And boom, that was taken out. And I'm sure there was other changes. There's not just that. Not just that. There was other changes to the game. I think when you were talking about how it's taken, right? If you put out a feedback questionnaire on the table, whether it's before, after, or any of the questions, as a creator, you got to have thick skin, right? You got to be able to take that criticism, say, thank you. Right? That's to get personal. They go, you suck. You stink. I'm like,
you suck as a GM.
I took a shower, so I cannot stink. I think sometimes people, they don't have thick skin, and I'm not saying I do, right? If somebody says, well, your game kind of sucked, I'm like, oh, why? Why didn't you like my game? No, nobody's ever said that to me.
I think that you have changed a little bit since you've been trying to think about if you want to publish an adventure. You really do want to know what the people think, versus you just made this game and you're asking your friends, and one of your friends goes, well, I don't think that worked, and you're like, screw you. Right?
What do you know?
Versus I'm thinking about publishing this, so you really want to know what people
you
like.
You really do.
Yeah. It's a different thing, right?
Supposedly you really want to.
You should, because you don't want to publish something and then there's a big flaw in the middle of this because you didn't connect the dots.
Yeah, you really have to develop that. I hate to use the word thick skin, but that's what it is. It's you're not going to take that feedback personally, right? Even though you're pouring your heart and mind into this project or whatever, and they're just like cutting you to pieces. But my final thing that I have written here is the best feedback is the one that points out problems in your creation. And that's what makes your stuff better, right? If people tell you, sing your praises. Oh, it was fantastic. And they're not being truthful. That's not going to help you.
No.
Right? You want honest feedback, creative criticism?
Yes.
Right.
You want to know what's wrong, but it is hard sometimes when people are telling you what's wrong because you're like, oh, well, I wrote it this way and I thought that worked in your brain, right?
Right, of course.
Going, and then they're going, I didn't understand what that meant. And you're like going, oh.
I couldn't make that connection. I mean,
and then you're like, oh, obviously I didn't make it clear enough in one sense. In the other sense, you're like, well, I think I made that clear enough.
right. Oh, and again, you have to ask multiple people, not a select group of 4.
Yeah.
That's not enough. I think the more feedback you get, the better your answer, the better the feedback it is, because you're going to see patterns in the feedback, right? Like if the majority of people like this and the majority of people did not like that, then that is a problem, right? Okay, well, that did not work. That's
right.
not working. Okay, what was the problem?
How could I change it to make it
right.
better?
And then or just eliminate it depending on what you're talking about. So I think feedback is important, but there's all kinds of things with feedback. You have to make sure that the feedback is plentiful, or you get a huge. The more, the better, because that is really what's going to help you. You got to make sure that your questions that you're asking are highlighting the things that you want to know about. If you're asking questions and like, oh, how was my game? And it was a good game. That doesn't help you, right? Those kind of questions, you got to eliminate those. You got to get the questions that help you make your game better or make your adventure better. And I think if you go online, there's all kinds of questionnaires. Somebody put a questionnaire that people, not a questionnaire, but a play test feedback for a board game. Mm-hmm. And it had like complexity and all, how long it takes and stuff like that. And though it's not perfect for RPGs, I think it's a good place to start as far as figuring out what kind of questions you want to ask and stuff like that. And of course, if you go to Reddit, there's a ton of people out there who will answer your question and say, well, you should ask this question and that question.
And a lot of them go, well, you should ask this question because I didn't. Right? That kind of, Especially if you go to the game designs people, right?
Yes.
They're like, oh.
And even, I don't know, I think that there might be some resources out there for people who create games as far as RPG creators. But if you were a board game creator, there'd be all kinds of places you could go. There's like a they call it protospiel, where people who are making games usually set up at a convention, or we've even gone to a protospiel at a
gaming store.
And protospiel for a board game event is perfect, right? What they do is they ask you to come run your game. Their creators are sitting at a table, and people come and play your game, and then give you feedback and stuff like that. So those were really fun. I really liked the one that was at the game store. We played like 5 or 6 games. 2 of them I really liked, and the other ones were okay.
You could really see the process when you did it too.
Yes.
You could see, oh, this game's not ready yet.
well, it's funny because like some people had like the board and everything laid out, and the other people had like literally pieces of paper cut into little squares. He goes, imagine. I'm like, yes, I can imagine that. Yes, I think that would be cool for RPGs if somehow you can do it.
I don't know.
I thought there was.
I'm sure. I know they have professional playtesters for RPGs.
Yes, but usually means paid.
Yes. I'm just saying that, if you're going to put out a game, you might want to consider lots of different playtesters. I remember when we talked to Panny and
Aled.
They were talking about how much they were playtesting, right? That's what they were doing at the time.
Yeah.
That's all he was doing was playtesting and changing things. And
yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting because he was doing it like a lot. And,
yes.
And I'm like,
he was running
you
games.
have got to be really tired doing that.
He was running games like every day.
Yeah.
Like multiple times a day at conventions. I think he was doing them online.
Yeah.
Even online, that gets tiring, I'm sure.
Yeah. So if you're going to be putting out a game, you definitely are going to be working hard on it. So hopefully this episode gave you some ideas of questions to ask or questions not to ask.
Right.
That's what you do. Good luck.
Good luck in your creating out there.
There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene.
and you have a good day.